Good morning. It's been a while since I've posted anything. I am going to focus on in my personal testimony this morning. One thing I learned from talking to people about what they believe and actually challenging people in their faith, especially the Mormon missionaries that I used to enjoy having into our home, so I could talk to them about Mormonism. There was one thing that they could not refute, and I would caution anybody who's trying to witness to other religions, especially people who are caught up in religious cults. There's one thing that cannot be refuted, and that's your own personal testimony, your story. If you have a story, but that's silly. We all have stories, every single one of us. We can talk about who we are, what we've done. There's so many things about us. You can look at me and immediately you know some things already. You can see by the hat that I have on that I am a Vietnam War era veteran, and that makes me pro-military. But some of my generation were anti-military because Vietnam divided the nation greatly, and I was on campus during the Vietnam unrest, and there are 58,000 men's names who are carved on the wall, the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington. And their testimony is that they went to fight in a war and they died. They gave their life for the country. They should be respected for that. You can't tell, but I was in the Navy. But you can tell from the way I'm dressed, and that's the initial telling point of anybody's testimony. You look at them and you can tell a lot about them. The way they dress, you can see on my shirt, there's right here, there's the little logo of my college. I graduated from Auburn University. And by my age, as you can see, I'm probably, in my 70s. And if you look behind me, you can see a couple of pictures on the wall. One of them is the lower part of a wedding dress. So you don't know what that is, though. Now, I'd have to tell you, and that's what your testimony is, because you cannot judge a book by its cover. You can look, you can observe, you can guess, you can speculate. But what I would encourage you to do, and all my friends, I've encouraged them to do this, is to write out their testimony. Now, I've written out mine. It's lengthy. I'm going to, for the most part, stick to the script. Now, a lot of this were my choices. A lot of this things that happened to me in my life were not my choices. And that's the way life is. And everybody eventually will have a testimony written about them if they don't write it themselves. It's called an obituary. The obituaries are so revealing of a person. It tells who they were, who they cared about. It tells about their family life. It tells about what they liked. There's all kinds of things that someone can put into an obituary. Lately, I've been seeing obituaries that were written by the person themselves. It is sometimes very distressing to me when I read about someone's life and they've lived 90 years or whatever, and there's no mention of a religious life at all. God does not even enter into the last discussion of their life. And that is the most important thing in life, is your relationship to God. And that's what my story is about. Now, I'm going to begin by saying I am a Christian. I know I haven't always been a Christian, but by the definition of many people, I always have been since the time I was baptized an infant in the Presbyterian Church in Tuskegee, Alabama. Many believe the ritual of baptism makes a person a Christian, but I do not. I started studying religions at a very early age and learned that there are many definitions by the different religions on who is or who is not a member of their particular faith system. In Judaism, a person is born Jewish if their mother is Jewish. The father can be of any faith, but the mother must be Jewish for the offspring to be Jewish. I did not have a Jewish mother. Therefore, I am not a Jew. I could convert to Judaism, but I have not. Now, in Islam, it's the opposite. Muslim children are born Muslim if the father is Islamic. The mother can be of any faith, but the father must be a Muslim for the child to be born Muslim. These are immutable rules. The child has no choice. You are born into that religion. And Islam is very serious about that because if you renounce your faith in some countries, you can be executed for renouncing. And let's say a Muslim converts to Christianity, more than likely they will be executed. But I was born into neither of these faiths, and my father and I never talked about whether he was baptized in any particular faith. But my mother told me she was Baptist, and she walked an aisle when she was a teen. Now, the reason I know that is the last year and a half of her life, I called her almost every night, and we talked because I knew what was coming. I knew that there would be a time where she would ask me to perform her burial service, her funeral. I had done that for my father. So I wanted to know, and I needed to know. And she told me about a time that she had walked the aisle as a teenager. Now, my earliest exposure to any particular faith was reading my grandmother's illustrated children books published by the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, the Jehovah's Witnesses. My grandmother had converted to Jehovah's Witness. And she had books, and I probably was maybe 6, 7, 8 years old. And I would read her literature. I do remember many arguments in our household about religion when I was growing up. My father would tell me many years later that for 3 to 4 hours a night, his mother would read the Bible to her children. She knew whole chapters by heart. As a young boy, I often roamed around Tuskegee, and I would go into churches and sit by myself, sometimes in the pastor's chair in the front, and occasionally stand in a pulpit and wonder what it would be like to preach. I guess that means I was a precocious child, but I loved going into the churches. And I was invited to Vacation Bible School because that was a lot of times a way of having some fun. But my family only attended churches on special occasions. I was about 14 when I really started getting a little more serious about religion, but it didn't last long. Girls became more interesting to me, like most other boys my age, until my senior year at Foley High School, when a kid invited me to his youth group. Steve Robinson meant well, but when I showed up with some Jehovah's Witnesses tract, I was not invited back. I would see Steve later at Auburn. He was then and is now a very strong Christian man. I believe he must have been praying for my salvation, but I haven't asked him about that. After graduating from Foley High School in Foley, Alabama, Auburn was my college of choice. U.S. Navy offered me a full scholarship. That meant I would owe the Navy 6 years of my life after I was commissioned, but they paid for all my schooling, so I did have that obligation. I hung out at the Baptist Student Union at Auburn because they had a pool table and they had some rooms that I could be left alone to study. It was a nice environment there. It was then that I found my spiritual mentor, a man named Edgar Casey. He was called the Sleeping Prophet, who had published quite a few books explaining the Bible from a reincarnation perspective. He was a Christian Bible study teacher at a Presbyterian church in Virginia Beach, Virginia, where his ministry was based. I devoured his books and made his perspective my own. This is where a lot of people are. They're not sure. So if they can find somebody who's already done the homework, they've already maybe gone to seminary, they have come to an understanding about who God is, and they can articulate it. This is how pastors end up forming churches and getting big followings. But Edgar Casey, his Jesus believed in reincarnation and taught it to his disciples. He said later church leaders had removed these teachings from the Bible, or so Casey taught. I became a firm believer in reincarnation and used 2 dreams I had to testify to others about the truth of these gospels. I had these dreams in a guru, so I felt very good about my Christian faith. Now, the dreams were the cement, I believe. They were very vivid. And in one of the dreams, I was leading a wagon train in the West. And I could feel the buckskins, the wind on my face. I was on a horseback. I had a rifle, and we were attacked by Indians. The wagons were circled up, and we were surrounded. There was no way to get out. So a week turned into 2 weeks. We were starving. We couldn't get out. But there was a nearby stream that we had passed, and I knew where it was. So I snuck out one morning very early, and I thought that I had been able to get out without being seen. Well, I was seen in this dream, and I was chased. I made it to the water. This very fierce warrior grabbed me. 2 of them grabbed my arms. They spun me around, and I'm looking up into this face. And this man has a tomahawk, and he hit me right here on the top in my forehead. And I knew that I was dead. Now, I woke up from the dream when he had my hair with one hand, and he had a knife, and he was scalping me. That dream was one of the most vivid dreams I've ever had in my life. It felt like I was reliving it. The other dream that led me into believing in reincarnation, I was again I was crossing a desert, and during the day you crawl underneath. It was near a big mountain range. I was crawling underneath rocks because it was so hot. At night I would travel. Well, one time when I crawled underneath the rock, I was bitten by a copperhead snake, and I knew I was going to die, and I did die. And I woke up from that dream when there were ants that were crawling in my nose and in my mouth, and I felt them biting me. Again, these are the most vivid dreams I've ever had, so I had a very strong belief. And I would share this with anyone that was wanting to talk about religion. Well, anyway, I married a beautiful woman who was raised Baptist, and she tolerated my weird belief in reincarnation. And that's what she said, but I didn't try to convert her. I had a certain arrogance. Those who believe in reincarnation, they have an arrogance that they know more than anybody else. They've lived so many lives. If you want to believe one of these religions, that's fine. It doesn't really matter, because when you die, you'll come back again. Reincarnation is a process. You learn from your past lives. You pay what's called karma in your next. So whatever you do in this life, it's very important that you try to do and live the best life that you can, not harming anybody, because anybody you harm, you're going to have to pay for it in the next life. I thought I was spiritually superior to these Baptists who had been indoctrinated into a faith that gave them comfort but could only be part of what was really the truth about Jesus. And why argue with them? They would find out in another life. So I just left them alone and less pressed, and then I would tell them about Edgar Casey. That usually ended because I would bring out so many scriptures to back up reincarnation that they would be befuddled. I mean, you take scripture out of context and you can prove virtually anything you want. I had contempt for these Christians because they could not refute any of the scriptures that I hit them with. And I felt very good about that, about my faith. But then a bombshell hit our family. After we had served time in the Navy, we decided to settle in the Hampton Roads area of Virginia. That's where I'd met my wife, and she had a large family group in that area. I wanted our 3 children to be raised around a large supportive family. My family was somewhat scattered, but with Sharon's family primarily in Norfolk, it made sense. This bombshell was something totally unexpected and affected our oldest son, Richard. Sharon had noticed he was urinating often, but it really was noticeable to me when we took him to Star Wars at the Narrow, and I was taking him to the rest room every 30 minutes or so. We took him to the pediatrician, and he was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes. I had no idea what this meant. Sharon immediately broke down in tears and went with him to CHKD for further tests to evaluate his condition and determine what insulin he would need daily and the number of injections. I found out this disease was incurable and he would have to live a very regimented life. I was, for the first time, faced with a situation that I could not control in any way. Now, how did this affect my faith? Well, this concept of karma means you suffer in this life for things you did in previous lives. That didn't really offer any comfort at all. But when it affects your little boy, you see, that's a theoretical thing. But it becomes real when it affects someone that close to you. And I was truly lost. We were attending this church that Sharon was raised in, First Baptist Church of Norfolk, but only on occasions. We were still nominally members of a Methodist church in Larchmont where we attended when we first moved back. But I was getting no comfort from knowing that this was karma. How could I help my son? Prayer really wasn't an option. People say pray, but in reincarnation, there's no point in praying. God is not a personal God. God is in all things. He is, like in Star Wars, the force that holds existence together. So why would you pray to a force? Well, that first night when Richard was put in Children's Hospital of the King's Daughters, a man walked to me in the waiting room, introduced himself as Bill Griffiths, a lay leader at First Baptist of Norfolk. He said the church was praying for us. I was surprised and told him we were not members of his church. He said that didn't matter. I would find out later Richard's grandmother had asked for prayer at the Wednesday night Bible study meeting. I told Sharon that as soon as we could, I wanted to visit that church. I knew how narrow Baptists were by reputation, but felt I should find out what was happening to bring out someone to visit us who was not even paid to do so. I was very cynical about why people would do things. Well, we visited First Baptist Norfolk, and I met a small group of very nice and sincere couples in Sunday school. They were sharing their problems, and the teacher was quite impressive. I found out later she was the pastor's wife. The worship service was immediately impactful. I felt the preacher was preaching just to me. I would feel that way often and many times over the next months and years. After becoming regular attendees, we started making friendships that have proven to be lifelong. I met my best friend there, a Navy captain named Randy Wagner, who I know God sent to me. I have been blessed for over 40 years with this man's steadfast love through some tough times. Dr. Kenneth Hemphill, our pastor, preached a sermon on these verses from Luke 11, and I'll read it. It happened that while Jesus was praying in a certain place, when he had finished, one of his disciples said to him, Lord, teach us to pray, just as John also taught his disciples. And he said to them, when you pray, say, Father, hallowed be your name. Now I could not say to God, Father. I didn't view him as my father. But Jesus said we are to call God Father. Your kingdom come. Give us each day our daily bread, and forgive us our sins, for we ourselves also forgive everyone who is indebted to us. And do not lead us into temptation. Verse 5, and he said to them, suppose one of you has a friend and goes to him at midnight and says to him, friend, lend me 3 loaves, because a friend of mine has come to me from a journey and I have nothing to serve him. And from inside he answers and says, do not bother me. The door has already been shut and my children and I are in bed. I cannot get up and give you anything. I tell you, even if he will not get up and give him anything just because he is his friend, yet because of his shamelessness, he will get up and give him as much as he needs. So I say to you, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be open to you. A-S-K. That's what I'm saying. A-S-K. You have to ask. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks it will be open. Now, which of you fathers will his son ask for a fish, and instead of a fish, he will give him a snake? Or he will even ask for an egg, and his father will give him a scorpion? So if you, despite well, I was sitting in a pew that day. I remember the exact spot where we're sitting. I can go there to that sanctuary today and take you to that place. Ken finished the sermon, and Baptist churches have a time where you can go forward. And the choir began to sing what the Baptists call the altar call. I immediately walked down and took Ken's hand and said, I want to be born again. I didn't say I wanted to join the church. I said I wanted to be born again. I realized I'd never asked God to send his Holy Spirit into my life. This is key to becoming a Christian, and it's simple. Just ask. It could not be plainer. That is the moment that changed my life. Now, I could call God Father because I had become his child. I didn't realize my other baptisms were sprinklings, and Baptists insist on immersion bodily. I resisted, but relented after a pastor named Dick Baker explained it was an outward symbol of an inner change of your life, and it is a witness to others. And I wanted to be a witness to others. This is what a disciple is called to do. My baptism was scheduled for the next Sunday, and it was a different feeling when I came up out of that water. I can't explain it, but it was something different. And walking out of the building later, I had my son Richard's hand in mine as we walked down the steps. He tripped, but I held him tightly by the hand, and then it hit me and tears came to my eyes, real tears. I knew then that what God had been wanting to do was just take me by the hand to keep me from falling and hurting myself. And he would hold me up even if I stumbled in life. And I would stumble greatly in the years to come. But I would have him keeping me from having a terrible fall. Being born again establishes that relationship. It doesn't mean I'm perfect or daily. What means I'm not perfect. What it means is he walks with me just like he walked daily with his son Adam in Eden. I knew I had to tell others my story, so I would start with Sharon's grandmother, who lives in Ocean View. We visited Sharon's grandmother often on Sundays. She lived with her 2 sisters and was a wonderful woman. I asked her when we got there, what do you think I did today? This was the Sunday I walked the aisle. She said she didn't know. I told her that I had accepted Jesus as my Lord. She surprised me when she said simply, "It's about time." She told me she and her sisters, all retired, would study the Bible every day and pray for family members who were lost without Jesus in their lives. She told me they had been praying daily for my salvation for 10 years. I realized then I had nothing to do with my personal salvation. It was those godly women praying for me, because I think they knew that if they told me they were praying for me, that it would have alienated me. I would have taken offense to it. I'm sure their prayers were the key to my salvation. I only regretted that my son had to be affected to bring me to this realization. I feel this relationship daily because he walks with me even when I sin and do things unworthy of being called his son, but he forgives me and loves me every day. I can live with confidence. This is the beginning of what is a 40+ year experience. Every day is something new and exciting. There were others who were instrumental in my salvation. Sharon's friends, Al and Loretta Myatt, were an example to us of what a Christian couple should be like. I watched Al and tried to be like him. I really did. But I was frustrated because he had someone in his life I did not know. And my efforts were futile because you can't be like a born-again Christian. You are going to fail. And Ann and Tommy Gerganis were also instrumental in our life together. These friends have had to forgive me so many times. And I'm ever thankful that they still remain close friends to this day. I don't know how I can end this other than I hope that this has encouraged, if you're watching this, encouraged you to write down your testimony, because there's going to come a day when your child or your grandchild wants to know what you believed. It could be standing in front of your coffin, and they can take comfort in knowing where you are. Jesus told me that if you are his disciple, he will come to you at that point, and he will take you with him to be with him in paradise. He said that to the disciples the day before he was crucified. That is the promise. And I know, I don't doubt, I know my salvation is secure in his hands.